Please confirm if you can hear me and see me and see the screen as well, so that we can begin the session. Can everyone hear me and see me? Yeah. See and hear. That's good. All right. Hello. Okay. Only hear me. You should be able to see me as well. We can only hear Podcast, you should be able to see me as well. I've switched the camera on. If there are any problems within the session, we will again be prioritizing audio over video. So if you experience any problems, we are going to be switching the video off. All right. So I'm just going to start. All right. Just to reiterate, and I do reiterate it a lot of times during the sessions as well. If you have not caught this before, please know that whatever questions that we do within these sessions, or whatever questions that I will ask you to do after the sessions, bear in mind that you must read the model answers by the examiner before you think that you have practiced a particular topic. So whatever questions that we practice during the session, please, you must read the model answers. This is one of the basic mistakes made by most of the students who then come up to me and say that they haven't been able to improve on their expression. And bear in mind that in P1, your expression, your written answers have nothing to do with how well versed you are with English. They have nothing to do with how well you can speak English or how well you can write English. You have to write in a particular expression when writing a P1 answer. And that's very important. So in order to make sure that you're writing exactly in the way that the examiner wants you to write, please bear in mind that you have to read the model answers. Us discussing the answers is not enough. You must read the model answers before you're fully comfortable with the text and before you can move on to the next topics. Now, the last topic that we needed to cover from the day one slides, which seem to be never ending, let's cover that, institutional investors. And I'm sure that I've mentioned institutional investors a lot of time during the sessions. Now is the time to understand who institutional investors are, why are they so important for the company, and how do they hold authority within the company. So I'm just going to open a Word document. Let me figure out how to. All right. Okay. So I'm going to start with institutional investors. And within institutional investors, you must first know that in a public listed company, there can be two types of investors. So in a public listed company, there can be two types of investors: institutional investors and individual investors. Individual or private investors. Now, bear in mind that when we are talking about private investors, you are talking about one individual who is investing own money, his or her own money or own funds in a company. Which is exactly why these individuals are called individual or private investors. In an institutional investor, bear in mind that an institutional investor would be an institution like a mutual fund or an insurance company where several investors, several individuals will all pool in their resources, pool in their money, give it to the mutual fund, and the mutual fund makes investments on these individuals' behalf. So for an institutional investor, in an institutional investor, there are several individuals who are pooling their resources, giving them to the mutual fund, giving them to the institution who makes the investment on their behalf. In a private investor's case, one individual is investing his or her own funds in a company directly. Now, can anyone tell me within your chat boxes? Neelam, you should be able to hear this. All right, okay. So, can anyone tell me, when you are going to be comparing the two, which one of these two types of investors is going to have majority shareholding in companies? Is a private investor going to have majority shareholding, or is an institutional investor going to have majority shareholding? All right, and that is the correct answer. An institutional shareholder or an institutional investor or a mutual fund or a bank or an insurance company is more likely to have majority votes within a company. Why? Because it does not represent one individual. It represents several individuals who are pooling in their resources and investing in one company. So an institutional investor is more likely to have majority shareholding within an organization. An individual investor in a company would be a minority shareholder, and this is why institutional investors are more important for directors, because they have higher number of shares, which is why they have a higher number of votes as well. Because you know that with shares come voting rights. And if they have a higher number of shares, it is very likely that they have a higher number of votes as well. So if you're going to be comparing the two, institutional investors and private investors, which of these parties is going to have more influence on decision making? The answer is going to be institutional investors. Those that have majority shareholding will have a major influence on decisions as well. So this is extremely important as far as decision making within a company goes, and as far as influence on the company's decision goes. So for a director, institutional shareholders, institutional investors are always going to be more relevant as far as decision making goes. Now, we did yesterday that institutional investors are not normally very vocal, or not normally an active part of an organization's day-to-day activities. Can anyone tell me? Now I'm going to test your knowledge of yesterday, because I'm going to do that and I'm like that. So tell me, can anyone tell me how many stakeholder classifications can you apply on institutional investors? How many stakeholder classifications can you apply on institutional investors? No, you don't. Please don't tell me the number. You have to tell me the classification that you're going to apply. No, Vikas, that's not the correct answer. They are legitimate, well done. Narrow, well done. Voluntary, well done, Rebecca. Passive, absolutely. Ali, they're not normally active because they don't take an active interest in the day-to-day running of an organization. Institutional shareholders, absolutely well done, are voluntary, are primary, legitimate, but passive stakeholders. Well done, recognized as well, Muna. So I wanted to test your knowledge of stakeholder classification. I am pleasantly surprised to know that most of you know this, which is extremely well done on your part. So now, can you tell me, these institutional investors are passive most of the time. They don't take an active interest in the day-to-day running of the organization or the day-to-day activities of an organization. But sometimes these institutional investors that are not so active within an organization do start making or do start monitoring the company very closely. there are some triggers, there are some points where institutional investors or institutional shareholders may intervene in the company's affairs. So, institutional investors most of the time are not going to be extremely vocal. However, they have the influence, they can be vocal, and there are some points throughout the organization's life cycle that institutional investors feel like they should intervene or interfere in the company's affairs in order to stop them from making certain decisions or encourage certain decisions. Let's discuss when would be the correct time for institutional investors to actually intervene in the company's affairs. I will give you one reason and you can discuss the rest of them. I think that institutional investors should intervene in the company when the company has consistently bad performance. And consistently bad performance would mean consistently low profits. All right. So as an institutional investor, low profit growth in 1 year may not frustrate me with the company or may not allow me in an organization, because that's normal for big organizations. But consistently low performance or consistently low profits could be alarming for institutional investors, who would then intervene in the company's affairs and ask the non-executive chairman the reasons for consistently bad performance. Another trigger point or another issue where institutional investors may intervene in the company's affairs would be when they see that non-executive directors are weak. By weak non-executive directors, we mean that non-executive directors are unable to challenge or scrutinize decision-making or strategies. Why? Because non-executive directors are supposed to protect the shareholders' interest on the board of directors. Now, if institutional investors feel like non-executive directors are not in a position to protect their interest, they are going to do so themselves by intervening in the company's affairs and asking the company to explain itself before it moves forward. The third point where institutional shareholders might feel the need to intervene in the company's affairs would be because of bad reputation in the market. Can anyone tell me why bad reputation in the market may cause institutional shareholders to intervene in the company's affairs? Everyone, come on, start writing in your chat boxes. I want all of you to write down in your chat boxes. I want an interactive class. I want my students to be on it. So tell me, why would institutional investors feel the need to intervene in the company's affairs if it enjoys a bad reputation in the market? Because absolutely shareholders' return may be influenced, share prices would fall, it can hit profit, and share price will decrease. Absolutely, because that affects the value of their investment. Because they would feel that it is affecting the value of their investment. Hence, institutional shareholders may feel the need to intervene in the company's affairs if they feel that the company enjoys a bad reputation in the market. Another reason for institutional shareholder intervention would be when they feel that the company is taking unethical decisions. And yes, this is interlinked with this, because if the company starts taking unethical decisions, institutional shareholders may feel that this would lead to bad reputation and ultimately a fall in share price. even if unethical decisions do not affect the share price, you have to understand that some institutional investors may not want to associate themselves with a company that takes unethical decisions. Similarly, another point for institutional shareholder intervention may be when the company does not comply with laws and regulations. When they feel that there are breaches of laws and regulations and they feel like they want to intervene in the company's affairs. Why? Because breach of laws and regulations can lead to sanctions applied by the government in the form of fines, which is going to put pressure on profits, in the form of suspension of companies' operations, which is going to affect the going concern and sustainability of the organization, and non-compliance with laws and regulations is also going to impact the reputation in the market. Absolutely. Institutional investors could also intervene when there are sudden increases and decreases in profit. Absolutely. When there are too many fluctuations in profit. There are a lot of points where institutional can and should intervene in the company's affairs. This is the list that I've written over here. This is not exhaustive. You will find several indicators that are mentioned in books, notes, everywhere where institutional shareholders may want to intervene in the company's affairs. However, I always say that you should memorize at least 5 points and then read the rest. So even if you get 5 direct, straightforward marks for points where institutional investors may intervene in the company's affairs, you should be able to write down the answer. Let's move to the question that we needed to do for this topic. This is day 1. All right. The question that we need to do is June 2014, question number 1C. Let me open the practice handout. All right, this is June 2014, question number 1C. Let's hope that you have actually read this case study before. All right. Yes, you have. So Zaza, you have already studied. Let's go through the requirement. We are going to be doing question number 1, part 2. Discuss the reasons why O Group should attempt to intervene in the governance of Zaza following the events described in the case. This is for 5 marks because these marks are equally split between each part. So the first part is direct, straightforward, where you don't have to link the answer with the case scenario, but the second part is linked with the scenario. So you have to be careful while answering this part. Now, if you're careful enough, you can identify at least 4 reasons why institutional shareholders should intervene in Zaza's affairs. Should intervene. All right. So you have 5 minutes to read this scenario. Please hurry up. It's 6:21 right now. We resume at 6:26. Make sure that you've read the case study. You've already read this, so you should not take more than 5 minutes to go through the case study and find the answer. I am going to give you more time if I feel like you have not read the case study properly. All right, let's go, people, in 5 minutes. All right. So I'm hoping everyone was able to read the scenario. Can anyone tell me that they were? Yeah. Can you confirm that you were all able to read the scenario? Yes. All right. So there is a reason why I gave you a specific specific time period in which I want you to read the case scenario. That's because every time you're practicing at home, please try and do it in a timed environment, time constrained environment. That is extremely important. You must time yourself and you must look at the time every time you're reading the case study in order to reduce the time that you're taking in reading the case study and use the time effectively by underlining and marking on your question paper. Like I've said multiple times before, that even though your examiner is not going to be reading anything that you write down on the question paper, you are doing this to give yourself a structure and to ensure that when you are writing down the answer, you take the least amount of time that is possible. All the time that we are going to save in writing down the answer, we are going to utilize in actually reading and making sense of the case study, which is more important than writing down the answer in itself. Now, I have the screen, I have my structure in front of you, and I have written down and highlighted on the question in order to show you how to structure your answer in the examination hall. So, if you look at the screen right now, I have highlighted the important parts in yellow, and I've written down on the sideline what I think the answer should be. This is exactly how you should structure the answers in the examination hall. If you do this, I can promise you that you're going to take lesser time in actually attempting the exam. You're going to do it in a more logical fashion. You're going to present the information in logical flow. It is highly likely that you will get professional marks as well, and this will give structure to your thoughts. So when in the exam, you start writing one paragraph and then you get another thought and you want to include that in the paragraph as well, if you structure your answer, that is not going to happen. You're not going to cut and overwrite. You're going to write down in lesser time, and you're going to actually follow all the points that you have identified from the case scenario. So, in this part, the entire answer, interestingly, to the question that we were just doing, I have highlighted within this paragraph. So the entire answer was here, where the head of the institutional investors actually voiced his concerns and told his concerns to the company, and the entire answer to this requirement was concentrated within this paragraph. So the first point, the first issue where institutional investors may feel the need to intervene within the company's affairs would be the fact that the board does not have any meaningful sense of ethics at all. This is where he says that the board believes in making a profit at any social cost. And like we discussed before, if the board is making consistently unethical decisions, it is a concern for institutional investors because they feel like they might lose share value due to poor reputation of company. So this is the first point where institutional investors may feel the need to intervene in the company's affairs because they feel like the company has been taking consistently unethical decisions that may lead to loss of share value due to poor reputation of Zaza company, and a better thing to write over here would be Zaza in the market. The second point where institutional investors may feel the need to intervene within the company's affairs would be that none of the non-executive board members were strong enough to question strategy and raise the problem of baby food as an ethical issue. Now, the second point was weak non-executive directors. We've already discussed this as well, that institutional investors, when they feel like their interests are not being represented on the board, they will intervene in the company's affairs. They will ask questions directly from the management themselves because they feel like the non-executive directors cannot or are unable to do so on their behalf. And when they feel like the non-executive directors have failed to protect the shareholders' interests, then the institutional shareholders would want to intervene in the company's affairs themselves. The third point, where institutional investors may feel like they want to intervene in Zaza's affairs, would be that he noticed that the board was becoming, or the company was becoming, more inward-looking and self-reliant in the recent years. Inward-looking would be inconsiderate of outsiders or inconsiderate of external stakeholders. So, O Group or the institutional investors in this case feel like the board has become inward-looking, and by inward-looking he feels like the board considers the need of internal stakeholders like employees, like directors and other internal stakeholders, but they are failing to look at the needs of external stakeholders like shareholders, like the normal general public, and like the environment, and that's why the board is taking consistently poor decisions. By inward looking, the institutional investor means that the board is consistently ignoring the needs and the claims of stakeholders who are not inside the organization, who do not participate in the day-to-day operations of the organization, and hence it is taking bad decisions from an external stakeholder point of view. Shareholders are external stakeholders. Why? Because they do not participate in the day-to-day activities of an organization. Internal stakeholders would then only be employees and directors. Can we use the highlighter while reading scenario in the exam? No, you can't, but you can use your pencil and you can underline important points within the exam. So if I had not used the highlighter, I would have used my pen to underline important points within the case scenario. All right. And the last is that the board lacks concern for medium-term business risks brought about by baby food marketing. So this institutional investor also believes that the board lacks concern for risks and is ultimately taking too many formulating too many strategies that are risky and may result in loss of shareholder value in the company. So these were the 4 points where institutional investors may feel like they need to intervene in the company's affairs. So this was institutional investors. We are just going to go to day 2 mercifully and start that. So within day 2, our first topic that we are going to be covering is approaches to corporate governance. Just let me open a new slide. I want margin to scribble. All right. So within day 2's topics, the first topic that we are going to be doing is approaches to corporate governance. Just CG in this case. There are 2 kinds of approaches to corporate governance, rule-based and principle-based. All right, so what does the word approach mean? And what does this entire topic mean? So, listen to this carefully. This entire topic means that different countries have adopted corporate governance differently. So, different countries treat corporate governance differently in their stock exchange. Some countries treat corporate governance as a rule and require compliance by all companies that are listed on the stock exchange to follow the principles of corporate governance, while other countries follow corporate governance as a principle only and give companies flexibility to either follow corporate governance or explain. This is extremely important. Approach to corporate governance is how has a whole country adopted corporate governance. Is it a rule for listing on stock exchange, or is it just a principle where companies who do not comply with corporate governance can also gain the listed status within the stock exchange? Now, which country, let's just first discuss which country in the entire world has adopted corporate governance as a rule for listing on the stock exchange. So far, the only country is USA, America. And in USA, the corporate governance rules are called the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. Sarbanes-Oxley Act. Other countries like the UK, Pakistan, most of Europe, are still following corporate governance as a principle. Now, as a P1 student, as a director, you will never be asked to comment on whether the rule-based approach is better or the principle-based approach is better. What you will be asked to do is evaluate. So discuss the positives of rule-based approach and the negatives of a rule-based approach as well. So let's first discuss what entails a rule-based approach, or what is included in a rule-based approach. The first thing that is included in the rule-based approach is compliance with corporate governance is required by law. While in principle-based approach, companies will have flexibility. They can either comply with the principles or explain. In rule-based approach, companies are required to comply by law with corporate governance. In a principle-based approach, the companies can either comply or explain. But what does explain mean? What do they have to explain? They have to explain in their annual report why they are not complying and when do they feel that they will be able to comply with the principles of corporate governance. But this is extremely important. In a rule-based approach, there is no flexibility to organizations. If they want to get the listed status, they will have to comply with corporate governance principles. In a principle-based approach, where corporate governance is only a principle, remember, companies are given the flexibility. They can either comply or explain in their annual report why they are non-compliant and when do they feel like they can comply or start complying with the corporate governance provisions. But this is extremely important. The second characteristic of the two is rule-based approach does not offer any, so no flexibility for organizations. So any organization that wants to get listed status within United States will have to comply with all provisions of corporate governance in order to get the listed status. In a principle-based approach, however, companies have flexibility. So there is flexibility. They can get listed status without having complied with corporate governance, and they can eventually explain in their annual report when they will start complying with corporate governance. So this is extremely important. The flexibility is, over here, in a principle-based approach, companies can get listed status without complying with corporate governance by just explaining within their annual report when they feel they will be able to comply with corporate governance. In a rule-based approach, the third basic characteristic is that there would be standardization within the organization. So, listen to this carefully. In the United States, all companies that are listed on the stock exchange share a similar board structure. where there will be non-executive directors, executive directors, CEO, chairman, balance, so on and so forth. So all companies will enjoy similar board structure. Why? Because corporate governance is a rule in the United States. For companies that get the listed status in UK, Europe, or elsewhere in the world, there will be no standardization. So some companies will be complying with corporate governance while others may not be complying with corporate governance. So some companies will have non-executive directors while others will not. Tell me, from an investor's point of view, which country will be easier to invest in? A country that follows rule-based approach or a country that follows principle-based approach? From an investor's point of view, which country will be easier to make an investment decision in? A rule-based country or a principle-based country? The correct answer is rule-based. I'll tell you why. Because standardization makes decision-making easy for investors. Now, look at it from an investor's point of view. If all companies share similar board structures, if all companies are going to have non-executive directors and executive directors, then the only thing that I have to consider as an investor is which company is earning more profit. That's it. Because I know that all boards will look exactly alike. Why? Because corporate governance is a rule in the United States. But look at an investor's point of view in a principle-based approach where there are different structures of the board, different profitability. So I am now confused. What should I base my decision on? The structure of the board, profit, or both? So from an investor's point of view, rule-based approach or rule-based countries are easier for me to take decision in. Why? Because all boards would look alike, and the only thing that I have to consider before making my investment decision is what is the profitability of an organization. But when I'm taking the same decision in a principle-based country, I might face difficulties simply because I would now have to consider whether there are NEDs, whether there are subcommittees of the board, and whether the company is profitable or not. All right. Now listen to my second question carefully and give me the answer. Listen to this carefully. In which country do you feel like companies would, in which country companies would feel the ease of getting listed status? So in which country or in which approach do you feel that companies would feel easy or relaxed in getting the listed status? In principle-based, absolutely right. All of you are right. In principle-based. Why? Because principle-based approach is less costly and newer companies that cannot afford a big board may feel ease in getting listed status. So remember, if I say it's a rule to have non-executive directors and executive directors, then smaller companies with fewer resources may feel like it is not cost beneficial to get the listed status because following corporate governance is costly. Having a big board is costly. Having balance on the board as far as executive directors and non-executive directors are concerned is costly. So newer companies may feel hesitant in getting the listed status. Why? Because they simply cannot afford to do so. In principle-based approach, these same companies can first get the listed status, can get access to funds, and then gradually start complying with corporate governance principles, having explained in their annual report when they can start complying. So tell me, do you understand the difference between rule-based and principle-based approach? Do you understand the difference between rule-based and principle-based approach? Complied or explained? Yes, all rules can be complied or explained. All right, that's perfect then. Let's move forward. So the only country that follows rule-based approach to corporate governance is United States, and like we said before, Sarbanes-Oxley Act is the law in United States for listed companies to follow when they want to get listed status or if they want to maintain their listed status within the United States. Now, Sarbanes-Oxley Act is summarized for you in slides 5 and 6 of day 2. You can go through this. This is not examinable in scenarios. So within scenarios, you may not get Sarbanes-Oxley Act, but you can get a straightforward question on Sarbanes-Oxley Act. So you have to memorize this with the point that it can be examined in a straightforward fashion within the case scenario. However, linking it with the case scenario would probably not be examined in P1. So you have to go through this summary, and if there's anything that confuses you, you can let me know in future sessions. What we do have to follow right now is outsider versus insider structures. Let's go through that. Just going to open a new slide for me to scribble on and close the last. All right. Okay. So let's start thinking this out. Now this is extremely important from exam perspective because this is normally tested in the exam. There are two different structures of organization, not board, of organization. We did two different structures of the board yesterday. What we are now going to do is two different types or two different structures of organizations, outsider and insider structure. Can anyone tell me, again, time for me to test what, your previous knowledge, can anyone tell me what were the two different structures of the board? What were two different structures of the board? Brilliant. No? NEDs and EDs are two different types of directors. Unitary and two-tier board. That's perfect. That's brilliantly done. All right. So you know that one word can make a world of difference between the requirements. So the examiner may ask you about two different structures of the board, and the correct answer to that is unitary and two-tier board. Or the examiner may ask you about two different structures of the organization, in which case he is asking you about outsider and insider organizations. This is extremely important. Two different structures of the board, and that is two-tier and unitary board. Two different structures of the organization, and the correct answer to that would be outsider and insider structure. Organization. I use ORG Ali for organization. I'm horrible like that. It's just that I've been teaching for so long that I have this bad habit of making and using my own abbreviations. You can absolutely ask me every time I use an abbreviation that you don't understand. ORG stands for organization. Normally MGT, that I very often write, is management. So please ask me if I use any abbreviation that you don't understand. All right, let's start. Outsider and insider organization. Now, outsider organizations are those organizations that we have read about, that we have been studying about, where shareholders are different from directors. So shareholders are on the outside, which is why this is called an outsider structure. Shareholders are on the outside, and by outside, this means that they do not run day-to-day operations. OPS would mean operations of the organization. Right? So they are on the outside of the organization and they hire directors to run operations on their behalf. This is the kind of company that we have been studying so far. So in the first session, the second session, and today, what we are talking about is an outsider organization where shareholders are on the outside. They don't run the day-to-day activities of the organization, and they've hired directors on their behalf to run the company or run the operations. Now, let's look at an insider structure. This is a structure where shareholders run day-to-day activities and operations themselves. So there is no distinction. There is no distinction between shareholders and directors. Shareholders are the same people who are running the organization, since they are the directors as well. Both kinds are workable options. Both kinds are successful organization. You will never be asked to choose one from the two. What you will be asked is to evaluate the two. So no agency concept in an insider organization. Ariba, you're absolutely right. No agency between shareholders and directors, since shareholders are the same people who are running the organization, so they are the directors as well. One of the examples of an insider structure is a family structure or a family-run organization, where a family structure is where one family owns and runs the company. So this is an example of, yes, insider equal to family structure. Family structures are examples of insider structures or insider organizations. Remember, the first concept to remember is the difference between an outsider and an insider structure. Do you all understand the difference between an outsider and an insider structure? Yes, no? Do you all know the difference between outsider and insider structure? All right. Remember, just to repeat for that one student who said no, please remember, in an outsider structure, shareholders are normal general public. So shareholders would be general public who buy shares in an organization. But does normal general public run a listed company? The answer is no. They hire directors on their behalf to run the company. Why is this called an outsider structure? Because shareholders are on the outside. They don't run the day-to-day operations of the organizations. They hire directors to run operations on their behalf. This is why this organization or this type of a structure is called an outsider structure, because shareholders are on the outside. They don't run the activities of the organization themselves. On the opposite side are insider structure, where shareholders are directors themselves. So shareholders and directors are one party. So those that own the organization run the organization as well. One of the examples of an insider structure is a family structure. The example of an outsider structure would be a public listed company. So family structures are examples of insider structures. Can a family business be listed on the stock exchange? Fawad, but then it wouldn't remain a family business, because if they have to float their shares on the stock market, then they would have to lose control, in which case there will be other shareholders involved, and in which case it would then become an outsider structure. Can partnership be an insider structure? Absolutely yes, Essen, it can be an insider structure, since partners are the fund providers and partners run the company as well. So yes, they can be insider structures. All right. So I'm giving a break right now. Since most of you are going to start asking for a break, I'm giving a break right now. This is going to be a 5-minute short break for those of you who want to go and pray. We come back in 5 minutes at exactly 7:02 p.m. and resume from here. Abrar does not want a break. So should I give a break for those who want to go and pray? Yes, no? Majority rules? All right. It's a mixed. All right. Done. So break then. I'm going to give a break. We resume at exactly, so I'm at exactly in 10 minutes. Should I give a 10-minute break? All right. So we resume in 10 minutes. But bear in mind that this is going to be costly for you in future, because you're going to be getting lesser breaks and lesser time for you to read the questions. So we come back at exactly 7:08. Please go and pray. We resume at 7:08. All right. Can I have all of you, can you all confirm that you guys are back and that you're listening so that we can continue? All right. Perfect. Okay. Let's start. Let me erase them. Okay. So we were discussing family structures. Rather, we were discussing two structures of an organization where we reviewed that there are two types or two structures of an organization. An outsider structure where shareholders are outside of the organization and shareholders are fund providers. However, they do not run the activities of an organization. And we also did an insider structure where shareholders who provide funds are also running the activities of an organization. For example, in a family structure where one family owns and runs the company as well. Let's discuss the characteristics of such a structure before we move on to the next topic. All right. So within such a structure, in a family structure, it is highly likely that such a structure will not be transparent, because in a family structure, the family would feel like they do not owe outsiders any information. So, since a family structure is normally not listed on the stock market because they do not want outsiders as shareholders, a family structure is going to be privately owned, privately held by the family who runs the company as well. And since there are very little to no outsiders involved in the ownership of the company, this company is going to be less transparent because it does not owe any outsider any information about the company. The second major characteristic of a family-run business or a family structure would be it would make more ethical decisions than an outsider structure, simply because, and listen to this carefully, simply because in a family structure, the business ethics and the ethics of the family are very closely linked. Family ethics are not very highly valued in an outsider structure where people hail from different backgrounds and from different families. But in an insider structure, specifically a family structure where the family owns and runs the organization, their ethics are extremely important because the business ethics reflect their family ethics as well. So such a structure, a family structure, is more likely, I'm not writing anything down. I have not written anything down. The last thing that I wrote on the screen was highly ethical decisions. That's it. All right? I'm just writing it down. Can you see it? All right. I'm just going to freeze the screen and then unfreeze it. Can you now see it? Yes? All right, that's perfect then. Okay. So, highly ethical decisions. So, in a family structure, decisions would be highly ethical. Why? Because this family is going to associate the business's ethics with its own family ethics, hence leading to more ethical decisions. Another important characteristic of a family structure would be this organization is less likely to take decisions based on short term and more likely to take decisions over the long term. I tell you why. Because in a family-run organization or in a family-run structure, short-term profits are their second priority. their first priority is to make the organization viable in the long term, because they know that they will be able to pass on their business to their upcoming generations only if the business is viable in the long term. Now, in an outsider structure, most of the directors are earning 50% of their remuneration through profit-linked bonuses. So for such directors, profits are extremely important. So they are more likely to take decisions based on the short term, where they can increase the profit and hence get a bonus through profit-linked bonuses. However, in a family structure, the directors are less likely to take decisions based on the short term, simply because they know that the short term is not as important as the long term, since they have to make the business viable and pass it on to their future generations. So, in a family-run structure, there is supposed to be lesser transparency in the annual report. Why? Because a family-run business does not owe information to any outsider, since outsiders do not have any stake in this organization. The second characteristic of a family-run business is they are more likely to take highly ethical decisions. Why? Because family-run businesses associate the business ethics with their family ethics. So they are supposed to take highly ethical decisions because they know that unethical decisions don't only damage their business's reputation, but are also likely to damage their family's reputation as well. The last characteristic that we did was that a family-run structure or a family structure is less likely to take decisions based on the short term, because a family-run structure is supposed to pass on to future generations as well. Hence, directors are more likely to take decisions based on the longer term, because they want to make the business viable and pass it on to future generations. There will be fewer agency costs, and this is where, ladies and gentlemen, you are going to answer the question, can anyone tell me why will there be fewer agency costs? So agency costs would be the cost of hiring non-executive directors, the cost of AGM, annual general meeting, the cost of audit. There will be fewer costs of non-executive director, fewer costs of audit, fewer costs of AGM in a family-run structure. Can anyone tell me why? Start writing on your chat boxes, please. Same principal and agent. All are from family. Well done. Excellent. Because principal and agent are the same. Because trust is high. And all answers are correct. Because owners are running the business. Well done. All of you are absolutely right. There will be fewer agency costs simply because the agency relationship and the agency problem does not exist. The shareholders and directors are the same party. These costs exist in an outsider structure simply because shareholders and directors are two different parties. So these were the characteristics of a family-run structure, and this is an example of an insider structure. We move to the next big topic from exam point of view in these sessions. Let me put that into context as well. I'm just going to, give me a second, I'm just going to change my slide and put this into context as well. All right, so right at the start of these sessions, I told you that corporate governance is a set of principles that gives guidance about three things: the structure of the board of directors, the subcommittees of the board, and internal control systems. We have gone through the board structure. We have also gone through two subcommittees of the board. I am aware that two are left, but two subcommittees of the board we have already done. And what we are just about to cover right now are internal control systems. Now, just to check your knowledge and your memory, which two subcommittees of the board have we covered up until now? Anyone? In the chat boxes. Which two subcommittees of the board have we covered up until now? Come on, people, start writing in your chat boxes. At least this way your typing speed will be improved. I'm preparing you for CDEs as well. Nomination and remuneration. Well done. Excellent. So your memory is okay. I just wanted to check your memory and the fact that you are paying attention. I've checked both. Thank you very much. Let's move forward. The board structure, we've done. Subcommittees of the board, 2 we've covered. We are just going to be covering audit committee in internal control systems, and then we are going to do the risk committee when we start doing risk. By my calculation, we should start on risk today. We will definitely not be able to finish it, but we can definitely start it today. All right, let's start with internal control systems. We can do internal control systems and we can cover internal control systems fairly quickly. That's because most of the theory of internal control systems we have covered already in F8. So that exact same theory from a different perspective is going to be tested in P1. So ICS, another abbreviation that I often use, stands for internal control systems. All right. The first thing that you should know about internal control systems is, why are you doing? All right, Seeing that is not an issue. We are going to be covering every part of internal control systems in detail, and you will have my revision notes as well to go through. So don't worry, you are covered on that area. You will be covered on that aspect. All right. So internal control systems. The first thing that you should know as far as internal control systems are concerned is that from a director's perspective, what is a director's responsibility as far as internal control systems are concerned? Directors are responsible for 2 things: designing and implementing internal control systems. So as a director, since P1 is entirely and only from a director's perspective, you should know that internal control systems are designed, made, and implemented, applied by directors within an organization. So this is the director's responsibility. So what are internal control systems? Why are they applied within an organization? That is the second question. So why? Why do we need internal control systems within an organization? What purpose do they serve? What we are right now going to cover is the objective of internal control systems. What do I mean by objective? Listen to this carefully. Objective means what purpose do internal control systems serve? Why are they important in an organization? Why should directors design and implement internal control systems? The first reason why internal control systems are important is that they ensure efficiency and effectiveness of operations. So the first purpose that internal control systems serve is that an organization should be able to achieve its objective. So if its objective is efficient operations, then internal control systems are going to help the organization achieve those objectives. What are internal control systems? They are sets of policies and procedures applied by management or directors within an organization. What purpose do these policies and procedures serve? The first purpose that these policies serve is ensuring that your operations are going to be effective and efficient. So it will take lesser time and increase output, and they're going to be effective, as in they're going to ensure quality of operations as well. The second purpose that internal control systems serve, or the second reason why internal control systems are important, is they will increase reliability of reporting. And when we are talking about reporting, as far as internal control systems are concerned, we are talking about both kinds of reporting. Internal, so those reports that are only required by management, and external, those reports that are required by shareholders. Remember, external reports are those that are required by shareholders. Internal reports are those that are required by management itself. And internal control systems increase reliability of both kinds of reporting, internal and external. How do they increase reliability of reporting? By ensuring complete and accurate records. So internal control systems are going to increase reliability of reporting, and reporting from both aspects, internal, so those reports that are required by management, and external, those reports that are required by shareholders. How are they going to increase reliability of reporting? By ensuring that records, accounting records specifically, are complete and they are accurate. Number 3, the third objective of internal control systems, or third reason why internal control systems are important within an organization, is they ensure compliance with laws and regulations. So if the entity is subject to any laws and regulations that are applicable by the constitution of a country or by the stock exchange, then compliance with those laws and regulations is going to be ensured by internal control systems. And lastly, internal control systems are responsible for, and internal control systems are important for safeguarding the assets of an organization. Now listen to this carefully. If internal control systems are well placed within an organization, they will help the organization achieve its objective. They will increase reliability of reports. They will ensure compliance with laws and regulations, and they will safeguard the company's assets. If internal control systems are misplaced, and if internal control systems are weak, then they cannot ensure achievement of the organization's objective, they cannot ensure reliability of reporting, they cannot ensure compliance with laws, and they cannot safeguard the assets. The answer to your question, Usman, is yes. Alright, so this is the objective, this is the reason why internal control systems are important within an organization. This is the objective that they serve. Is everyone clear on this? Yes, no? People, are you hearing? Are you here? More importantly, are you listening? Alright. So, I hide my sample checks and I just keep asking you questions. And you think that they are sound checks, but no, they're not. I'm just trying to know if you are listening or not. So I want you all writing in your chat boxes. Alright, the scene there are only 4. So I can't say one more because I'm not making them up. There's a proper framework for internal control systems. And yes, thank you for listening to me. Okay, now these are the reasons why internal control systems are important within an organization. These are the objectives that they serve within an organization. Now, there are two frameworks that are applicable on internal control systems. So there are two kinds of frameworks that talk about internal control systems. Let me point those out for you. So framework applicable on internal control systems. There are two kinds. There's the COSO framework and there's the Turnbull framework. Both frameworks are absolutely similar. The only difference is COSO is applicable in the United States, whereas Turnbull is applicable in the UK. Both are similar. You are going to be covering both because you are doing P1 Global. So we are going to be covering both. What we just did, the objectives of internal control systems are covered by the COSO framework, and we just did the COSO framework. All right. So the second major topic that you have to do today is what does a good system of internal control systems, so what do good internal control systems include? What does a sound system of internal controls look like? So when we're talking about internal control systems, what we just covered was why are they important? And just to memorize, just to put this into context, you have to remember that internal control systems are important for achievement of an organization's objective and to increase reliability of reports. So let's now look at what do internal control systems include? What are the components of a good internal control system? So the components of a sound system of internal controls are 5. And you have to memorize them because you can't change the names. This is the COSO framework, so you cannot change the name. The first component of a sound system of internal controls is control environment. The second component is risk assessment. Third component is control activities. Fourth component is information and communication. The fifth and last component is monitoring controls. So, the COSO framework says, and what are these things that I've written? Listen to this carefully. The COSO framework says that if your organization's internal control systems include a good control environment, sound risk assessment, well-placed control activities, clear information and communication, and frequent, regular monitoring of controls, then you have got a sound system of internal controls. And if these 5 are not present in your internal control systems, then your internal control systems are faulty. They have to be checked, and you have to ensure that these 5 components are present in order to ensure good system of internal controls or a sound system of internal controls. Now, in yes or no, they're not in order. There is no specific order. There is no mnemonic for it, Jawad. You will have to remember them all. So please tell me, do you understand what these 5 components are? We are going to be doing them in detail. We are going to be doing them in detail. I just want to know if you understand what these are. Sound system of internal controls is COSO. All right, that's good. That's brilliant. Okay, remember, according to COSO, COSO says if you've got a good control environment, if you've got sound risk assessment, and we are going to be doing them in detail, if you've got well-placed control activities, clear information and communication within your organization, and regular monitoring of controls, then you've got a sound system of internal controls. Yamuna, I am going to be differentiating between the two. I am going to be differentiating between all. Don't you worry. Just keep confirming if you understand and if you're with me up until now. So the first component that COSO talks about is a good control environment. Now, if I was to put control environment, or if I was to explain control environment in one line, I would say that control environment is the attitude of management towards controls. COSO says that the tone that is set by management at the top is going to define whether employees are going to be following controls or not. If management communicates to employees that controls are important and must be followed, then it is highly likely that employees will understand the importance of controls and they are more likely to follow them if management clearly communicates to them regularly that controls are important and they must be followed. So the tone at the top and the culture of the organization is the control environment of the organization. If an organization is informal, and if I have set the culture as a director that controls are not important, I don't know why they are placed, then control environment is going to be weak. Why? Because my subordinates are never going to follow controls until I do, and they understand that controls need to be followed. Does everyone understand what control environment is? Control environment is the tone set by the management at the top. It is the attitude of management towards controls. The more importance they give to controls, the better the chances that control environment is going to be strong and that employees will follow it. So how does the management implement good control environment? By implementing accountability. By having accountability within an organization. So I can only have good control environment if every employee knows what and who they're accountable to. So what they're accountable for and who they're accountable to. Now listen to this carefully. The question is, and everyone in your chat boxes, are employees more likely to follow controls if they are held accountable or if they're not? Are employees more likely to follow controls if they're held accountable or if not? If they're held accountable. So listen to this carefully. I will follow controls if only I know that my supervisor is going to question me about them. So remember, in an organization where control environment is strong, it is highly likely that management has accountability systems in place to make sure that all employees are held accountable for whether they have been following controls or not. The second most important thing within good control environment is not just accountability, proper oversight. So as directors, as management, we have to keep a check. our employees will only follow controls if they know that someone in some place is checking whether controls are being followed or not. If there is good oversight, if there is proper oversight, then employees are more likely to follow controls because they know not only will they be held accountable, they will also be asked, there is someone who is supervising this, there is someone who is keeping a check on whether employees are following controls or not. You tell me now, control environment is likely to be stronger when management wants to hire competent employees, or when you think that recruitment is not based on competence? I will ask my question again. What do you think that control environment will be like? Is control environment going to be stronger when more competent employees are hired, or when importance to competence is not given? All right. Tasneem, I'm going to ask you to answer as well. I've started remembering names now, which is not good, since I'm going to be asking specific questions. Why? So my next question is, why? Why do more competent employees translate? Why does more competent employees translate into good control environment? Because remember, competent employees are highly likely to understand the importance of controls and hence are more likely to follow them as well. Excellent, Saqib. That is the correct answer, better understanding. Because if employees are competent, they will understand the importance of controls and hence are more likely to follow them. Who doesn't follow controls? People who don't understand what they're for. And people with skills normally understand why controls are important and hence are more likely to follow. So, the first component of a sound system of internal controls is good control environment. How do you make a good control environment? What is good control environment? Remember, you make a good control environment by setting the right tone at the top, by setting the right attitude of management at the top. How do you do that? By having proper accountability within an organization, by having proper oversight within an organization, and by recruiting competent employees. Through these, you can ensure that the right attitude is set within an organization and importance is given to controls. Does everyone understand control environment? Good control environment. Does everyone understand good control environment? Start writing, people, in the chat boxes. Come on. I want you all to write this down. All right. How many? Okay. Brilliant. Okay. The second is sound risk assessment. Now, the first question that should come to your mind when reading sound risk assessment is, what does that have to do with controls at all? So, the first question that you should ask yourself while reading risk assessment is, what does risk assessment have to do with controls at all? And let's answer that. Remember, sound risk assessment will always translate into good controls. So good quality of controls. How? Over here, we are talking about business risks. What are business risks? Any risk that can affect operations and organization's ability to achieve objectives. So, any risk that has the ability to affect my organization's operations and the ability can affect my organization's ability to achieve objectives is a business risk. Now listen to this carefully. Controls are meant to mitigate or minimize risk. Risk assessment means, or sound risk assessment means, good understanding of risk. Now I want you all to pay attention because I'm going to link the two. I first told you that business risks are any risks that can affect an organization's operations and the organization's ability to achieve objectives. Controls are meant to minimize these risks, business risks. Sound risk assessment would mean good understanding of risk. Now listen to this carefully. COSO says that if you understand risks properly, only then can you be able to make a control, only then are you able to make a control to address those risks. So risk assessment can affect quality of controls. The better I understand risk, the better I can make a control to address that risk and to minimize it. Ali, do not overlap concepts. So take Tara out of your mind. Please take Tara out of your mind. Alright, can everyone hear me? I want you all to write down in your chat boxes. Can you hear me loud and clear? Loud and clear. If you can't hear me, you have to exit and then rejoin in order to make sure that you can. Since most of you can, I'm going to continue. Alright, that's perfect. Okay, now listen to this carefully. Risks are meant to affect an organization's operations. These same risks can affect an organization's ability to achieve objectives. Controls are meant to achieve an organization's objectives. Controls are also meant to reduce risk. Now, the better I understand risks, the better I can formulate a control to address that risk. If I don't understand risks, then I cannot make a control to address those risks because I don't understand them. So this is extremely important. COSO says the first step to making good controls is having the right attitude. The second step to making good controls is understanding the risks that the controls are supposed to minimize. When you understand risks, only then can you make good controls to address those risks. For example, I'm just going to give you an example. I'm going to scroll down, find an empty space. All right. One of the risks that can affect an organization's ability to make a profit would be foreign exchange rate risk. So exchange rate risk, the risk of fluctuating currency. So all of you in your chat boxes, this is my risk. This risk can minimize my profitability and can affect my ability to actually achieve high profits. So this is my risk. Can you tell me one control that I can apply to minimize this risk? One control that I can apply to minimize risk. Matching, hedging, well done, future contract, all are hedging technique, risk hedging. And listen to this carefully. Or I could only deal in my local currency. I could make payments in my local currency, or I could take payments from customers in my local currency. So I have a lot of options. I could hedge, I could match outflows with inflows, or I could deal only in my local currency. Or Jawad, you're absolutely right, set up a treasury department. All of these things that you just said are controls, are control mechanisms. And you can tell me a control, you have been able to tell me a control because you understand the risk. And that's the point of COSO. COSO says, the better your understanding of risk, the better your assessment of risk, the better controls are going to be, because if you understand the risk, only then can you make a control that addresses that risk. Do you all understand risk assessment? Yes, no? All of you? Does everyone understand risk assessment? All right. So I'm just going to give you one more example where I'm going to tell you that risks can affect an organization's ability to achieve objectives. And within these risks, the organization has to make controls to mitigate or minimize those risks. Another risk, let's talk about another risk, the risk of default. Default risk. This is a business risk. It can affect your operations because it can affect cash flows and can affect the long-term survival of an organization. Default risk would be the risk that customers may not pay outstanding amounts. Vikas and Tasneem, I hope you understand default risk. So customers may not pay their outstanding amount. They may default on their amounts, and what would happen then would be that cash flows would go down and organization survival would be affected. Can you tell me any control that would minimize the risk of default? Vikas? Tasneem? Any control that would minimize the risk of default? Any? Name one. Vikas, you'd have to name it. More efficient credit evaluation. Well done, Ali. Debt factoring. Regina. Well done. Early settlement discount. Suleiman. Absolutely. Proper credit rating. Ariba. Absolutely. See, do background checks. Absolutely. That's correct. Jawad is right. So, how are you? All of these tactics that you've told me, they're all controls. All of them are controls. I could, number one, deal in cash, like one of you said. I could reduce my credit period. And while I could previously be asking for payment in 30 days, I could now ask for payment in 10 days. I could factor. I could do debt factoring. And in that manner, I am trying to protect my organization from default. This is risk assessment, the ability to understand the risk and then make good controls to reduce or address those risks. So that's how risk assessment factors into good system of internal controls or a sound system of internal controls. So COSO says, the better you understand risk, the better your chances of making good controls that address those risks. All right. So the next is control activities. Well-placed control activities. Control activities are processes through which risk is minimized and objectives are achieved. Control activities are processes through which risk is minimized and objectives are achieved. For example, I'm going to use the exact examples that you guys gave me. So, one of the control processes is hedging. Hedging is a control process that reduces the risk of fluctuating currency values and increases profit, because fluctuating currency values will decrease profit through exchange losses. So if the organization wants to protect itself from exchange losses, One control mechanism would be hedging. If the organization wants to protect itself from bad debts or the risk of irrecoverable debts, one control procedure or one control activity would be early settlement discounts. Like someone said from the audience, and this is correct, early settlement discount or factoring. So well-placed control activities will lead to a sound system of internal controls. But if you're not placing controls for the right risks, then your organization does face risks and your organization will have to face losses. Your organization will not be able to achieve its objectives and your internal control systems are then faulty. Gossel says your control activities should be well placed. They should be able to reduce your risk to an acceptable level. SN tomorrow. The answer to your question is tomorrow. All right. So does everyone understand what control activities are? These are the processes through which risk is reduced and objectives are achieved. Hedging is a control activity. Treasury department is a control activity. The same, factoring is a control activity. Early settlement discounts are control activities. Now, tell me one control activity that should prevent the risk of fraud. Tell me one control activity that addresses the risk of fraud. The most often used control activity for risk of fraud. I'm looking at the answers, and most of you are giving me the right answers. Correct. Authorization is a control activity for risk of fraud. Similarly, segregation of duties is a control activity for the risk of fraud. Review, Ginny, absolutely right, is a control activity for risk of fraud. The same, I have no idea what you've written. Can you please explain what you've written? Two designated signatories, well done, segregation of duties. So, segregation of duties, having separate people responsible for separate jobs is segregation of duties, is a control activity that is meant to reduce the risk of fraud. All right? Having authorization on documents is supposed to prevent employees from making unauthorized transactions. Having passwords is supposed to restrict employees from making unauthorized changes to data. All of these things, monitoring, signatures, segregation of duties, guards, all of them are control activities. Tasneem, you're absolutely right. Guards are also an example of a control activity. They're called physical controls. Well done. So all of these are control activities. They have to be well placed in order to ensure that risks are in fact minimized and objectives are achieved. Now, next, Cosso also says that in order to make a sound system of internal controls, it is very important for an organization to have clear communication and information flow. I'll tell you why. Because Cosso says information needs to flow unhindered. Unhindered would mean unstopped, unhindered, and undistorted in order to make good controls and address risks. All right. So just ignore what I've written for a minute. Just ignore what I've written for a minute. Listen to me carefully. Remember that case study that we did yesterday, Amy, where Amy was hired in a family structure and Amy was the only director on the board of directors who had finance qualifications. This case study is called Lysis. Do you remember it? Where Simon Mara was the CEO of the company and he took the decision to use low-grade material in hip replacement surgery. Do all of you remember that example? Do all of you remember that case study? At the start of second lecture. Well done, yes, that. All of you. So, Vikas, even if you don't, I'm going to explain anyway, so that you know what the context is. So for those of you who remember, well done, I'm going to explain it. I'm going to repeat it. And for those of you who don't, I'm going to repeat it anyway, so you're going to know. So, Amy was hired onto the board of directors, and she was not comfortable with the company's decision to hide certain information from shareholders. Now, Amy was quiet and Amy did not choose to report it because Amy did not know who to report it to. In this organization, reporting channels were weak. Information and communication was not clear, and hence reputation suffered because important information did not get communicated on time. GOSO framework says that if you want a sound system of internal controls, you have to ensure that clear information is reported at the right time to the right people so they can take action and prevent losses and ensure that objectives are achieved. Please remember that. GOSO framework says that information and communication should be clear. And information should be communicated at the right time by people to the right reporting hierarchy in order for people to take action, in order for management to take action and address risks on a timely basis. In an organization where information and communication do not flow unhindered, and in an organization where information and communication is not clear, it is highly likely that risks will materialize and objectives will not be achieved. Profit can only be maximized. Wealth can only be maximized for shareholders if information is communicated at the right time to the right people so that corrective action can be taken. This corrective action is a control. This corrective action will be a control activity. So if I don't tell my supervisor that I think inventory can be stolen and someone can come and steal from the warehouse, then my supervisor cannot take the right action at the right time and install CCTV footage over there and have a guard provide security to the warehouse at the right time. Information and communication must flow through the organization at the right time to the right people in order to ensure that controls are working properly and that objectives are achieved. Do you all understand why clear information and communication are important for sound system of internal controls? Yes? All right. Perfect. Yamna, I hope you got the difference between control environment and control activities. That's what you asked. If I'm not mistaken, that's what you asked. And if that's what you wanted to know, I hope that you understood it. All right. Okay, well done. So next is regular monitoring. Okay. Now regular monitoring, and the last component of sound system of internal controls is regular monitoring. Now regular monitoring is extremely important because, okay, a 5-minute break is coming up, but I'm so sorry that your mind cannot be unstuck during those 5 minutes because I have a question lined up for you. All right, so regular monitoring is important to ensure that controls are updated and I've run out of space, and effective. That's it. So regular monitoring would mean, regular monitoring entails regular updation of controls and ensuring that controls are effective. Now listen to this carefully. COSO framework says that in order to maintain a sound system of internal controls, controls must be monitored regularly so that it can be ensured that when processes change within an organization, controls change with the process. Because what happens is the process changes and the control stays static, and in that manner, control cannot address the risk. So when the process changes, control should be modified to change with the process in order to ensure that objectives are achieved. Who should monitor controls? The directors, those charged with governance. All right, Jeannie, hello, I'm here. I'm listening. What do you want to say? All right, so I'm not listening, I'm reading. So if you want to say anything, you should ask a question. I'm hoping that you all can hear me. Afroz, the correct answer to your question is those charged with governance, the directors. Please explain the CEO's role within this. Monitoring controls, the CEO is going to have an internal audit department set up, and I'm just going to explain what the internal audit department does, but the CEO is going to be setting up the internal audit department so that controls are monitored regularly. Does the CEO do it himself? No. He has an internal audit function that is given the duty to monitor controls, to identify control weaknesses, and give their recommendations to the board. Means that it should be dynamic. Yes, Jawad, your answer is correct. All right. The audit committee does it, Ali. We are just going to be doing the audit committee in a while. Please bear with me. All right. So let's go back to the slides for a minute. And we are here. Causes of internal control failures. So even though internal controls are present within an organization, why do internal control failures exist, or why do internal control failures happen? There are several reasons. There are two slides that I've written for this. They're not very technical. Please go through them at home, and if there is any confusion, you can ask me. Right now, I have two questions lined up, but since we are short on time, what we are going to do is we are going to do one question, and we are going to do one question at home and discuss it tomorrow. So what we are going to do right now is this question, December 2015, question number 1D. If you open to the day 2 practice sessions, you're supposed to be doing December 2015, question number 1D. Let me open it up. There, care services. And since this is a newer case study for you, I'm going to give you 10 minutes to read this case study and then discuss the answer. Please make sure that you have read the entire text, because you won't be able to answer my questions if you have not. All right, let's go through the requirements like we always do. Not this, but we are going to be discussing this as well. But I don't need you to read this in the 10 minutes. What you are going to do is this: a proposal recommending suitable internal control changes that would help to address service delivery failures described in the case. So the delivery failures are given. You have to read them and think about controls that can prevent future failures. All right, now listen to this carefully. You have to read the case scenario and then identify the failures that are given. You then have to think about controls that you can implement to address those failures and prevent them in future. There are 8 marks for this answer. But if you look at the mark allocation. And if I read the mark allocation, then you should know that within this question, there are 2 professional marks. 2 professional marks. These 2 professional marks are for the format of the letter. Draft a letter from Dr. Sam Tan. So for the format, there are 2 professional marks. And listen to this carefully. The letter format, memorandum format, press statement format are all going to be emailed to you by the end of these sessions along with the summary notes. I have made these formats, I have compiled them in the form of a handout, and I will forward them to you by the end of the session so that you can learn the formats, and whenever a letter comes in your exam, you should know what format to make a letter on or draft a letter on. So 2 professional marks. So in essence, there are 6 marks for this requirement. If you exclude the 2 marks for drafting a letter, you have to discuss 3 controls that would address failures mentioned in the case. You have 10 minutes to do this, but this is the last break that I'm giving today, so use it wisely and use it well. It is 8:09 now. We resume at 8:19. Start. Are you guys all here? Have you read it? Let's go, people. I know that you've been listening for a very long time and the break was shorter than you'd like, but everyone, are you guys here? Yes? No? Have you read this? Not completed? Ali, I'm so sorry that you haven't, but see, there are so many people in the webinar, and if I had to stop for each and every one of you like I'd like, I would, I promise, but I can't. So, let's go through the answers one by one. All right. I'm sorry that this is coming up with a lag. All right. So, just out of curiosity, did you go through the first requirement? Let's read that. An explanation of the importance of internal controls in CSC and other care service providers. What would you write in that? What would you write in that? What do you think the examiner wants you to write? What would you write in the answer to the first requirement? An explanation of the importance of internal controls at CSC and other care service providers. Objectives of internal control systems, as Meena, well done. Advantages, benefits, yes. And if you read carefully what we did before everything in internal control systems or the purposes of internal control systems are absolutely right answer. Those 4 things that we did, those. The 5 points that we just did, Yamuna, not a system of sound internal control systems, but actually what you had to write was that internal control systems are important for ensuring effectiveness and efficiency of operations. They are important for ensuring or increasing the reliability of reporting, internal and external, for safeguarding assets, for ensuring compliance with laws and regulations, so on and so forth. Those were not linked with the case at all, Abdullah, general. The first part of this requirement is general, it is straightforward, it is knowledge-based. The second is care service delivery failures and controls to address those failures. Let's look at the failures. The first failure is that service or care providers, service providers were not spending sufficient time. That was the first failure. The second failure was that they sometimes missed out important services. So often their patients were left hungry or in considerable pain because the service providers or the care providers forgot to administer medicines or they forgot to give them food. And those were about it, and high number of complaints from service users. Let's see. What do you think can be the controls to address these failures? Can anyone tell me what could be the control to the first failure reported? Yes, Afroz, you should first identify failures and then suggest control activities. Timesheets, good salary or hire more, but that wouldn't mean that care service providers would spend sufficient time. I'm asking, how would you ensure as a director that every care provider spends sufficient time on one patient? The correct answer would be timesheets. and real-time attendance, so that time can be marked and that someone can keep an oversight, keep a check on how much time is being spent per patient real time, so that time card signed by patients. Sakib, that is the correct answer as well. You could employ or institute that control as well. So maintain timesheets, that is the correct answer. Someone would have to monitor their attendance in real time, so that when care providers sign in and sign out, someone can ensure that they are actually spending 30 minutes on each patient, which is the prescribed minimum amount of time that they should be spending on the patients. The second delivery failure was that they sometimes missed out on important services. Can anyone tell me control for this? Any control that could address the fact that they were missing out on administering medicines? Yamna, is that the answer to the second failure, the one that you've written? There should be checklists. Well done. So you could have checklists that care providers would have to tick and sign to ensure that they were actually providing the service that they signed up for. All right. You could also have another. Control over here. Another control would be feedback forms. So feedback forms from patients, asking them or checking whether they were administered medicines and whether their needs were fulfilled by care providers or not. Ali, absolutely right. The increased number of complaints can be addressed by increased training and reinforcement of ethical values. All right. Now, if I were the examiner, I would give extra marks to a student who would mention that this type of industry, the industry that's been talked about within this case scenario, in this type of industry, ethics are of extreme importance and ethical values are of extreme importance. So care providers should not just be trained on how to provide care to patients, they should also be trained on the fact that the quality of their service matters more than the quantity of patients that they are addressing. Reinforcement would mean frequent training in ethical values. Reinforcement would mean frequent revision of ethical values. So when you go home, you reinforce a concept by revising your concepts. That's reinforcement. Revision of ethical values. So I would give a student extra marks for mentioning that this industry, the care providing industry, is such an industry where quality would matter more than quantity of patients that are addressed. So this is very important. If I were a student, I would mention it that increased number of complaints could be addressed by increasing training of care providers and specifically reinforcing ethical values in order to ensure that all care providers were adhering to those values, were following those values, and considering the quality of their service more important than the quantity of patients that were managed in a particular day. So does everyone understand this answer? A proposal recommending suitable internal control changes. Please, like I said at the start of the session, and I'm going to say this again, whenever you stop this session and whenever you get time throughout the day, please make it a habit that you have to read the model answers of these questions. The model answers are available. They're available on the ACCA Global website, and you have to go through them. If you want to improve your expression, because some of you have asked me how to improve expression, please remember that if you want to improve your expression, the only way to do it is by reading the model answers. All right, let's go to our slides, actually the slides that I keep making. and let's revise, or let's move to the next topic. All right. So the next topic is, and remember, just to put this into context, let's revise where we are at. We're reading internal control systems. In internal control systems, we first did the objectives of internal control systems, which were efficiency and effectiveness of operations, increasing reliability of reporting, safeguarding of assets, so on and so forth. The second thing that we did was a sound system of internal controls. And within that, we read that a sound system of internal controls, according to COSO, has 5 components: control environment, control activities, risk assessment, information and communication, and monitoring controls. What we're now going to do is, within internal control systems, 2 very important individuals or 2 very important entities are the internal auditor and the audit committee. Because your internal control systems will never be up to the mark. They will never be of a good quality if there is no internal auditor and if there is no audit committee. Let's just first do what an internal auditor does in an organization. An internal auditor is an individual, or an internal audit department is set up to keep a periodic, and periodic would mean regular, check on controls, risk, and governance, how an organization is run, in order to ensure effectiveness. Now this is very important. Okay, so remember when I said that in a sound system of internal controls, the directors are responsible for monitoring controls, right? So the directors are responsible for monitoring controls. Within directors, who exactly is responsible for monitoring controls? The audit committee. And the audit committee has delegated that task to internal auditors. This is extremely important. You should remember this. This is extremely important. You should remember this. So COSO's sound system of internal control says that controls should be monitored regularly. Whose responsibility is it to monitor controls? Remember, according to corporate governance, the audit committee is responsible for monitoring controls. Since the audit committee is comprised of non-executive directors who are independent and don't run day-to-day activities of an organization, they hire internal auditors to monitor controls on their behalf. So, does everyone understand how audit committee and internal audit are a part of this topic? I don't want you to understand what internal audit is. I don't want you to understand what audit committee is. I simply want you to tell me whether you understand how audit committee and internal auditors are a part of this topic. Remember, COSO says controls should be monitored regularly. COSO also says audit committee should monitor controls. But audit committee is only comprised of non-executive directors, independent non-executive directors. Now you know independent non-executive directors cannot run day-to-day activities of an organization. So what the audit committee does is they hire internal auditors to monitor controls on their behalf. An audit committee is a subcommittee of the board of directors. Vikas, You should not be asking this question. If that's session 1, that is the first session that we did. So audit committee is a subcommittee of the board of directors. It is comprised of non-executive directors exactly like the remuneration committee is comprised of non-executive directors. So do you all understand? I want confirmation. Do you all understand how internal auditors and audit committee form a part of this topic? Alright, now let's look at what the internal auditor does, or what purpose does an internal auditor serve. An internal audit department or an internal auditor is set up to keep a periodic check on controls, this is important, risk and governance of an organization. They will keep a check on controls, they will keep a check on risks and governance. So here, yes, an internal auditor is supposed to be independent. I will just discuss how independent they should be. So just give me 5 minutes, and if I don't explain it in 5 minutes, ask your question again, Suhail. Alright, I'm just going to answer it. Let's first look at whether all organizations need an internal audit function. So, answer the question. Do you think all organizations need an internal audit department? Yes, no? A simple one-word answer would suffice. Do all organizations need an internal audit department? Alright, your answer is correct. No, all kinds of organizations would not need internal audit department. I'll tell you why. Listen to this carefully. Because in a smaller organization where directors have fewer duties, directors can monitor controls themselves. They don't need to delegate this task of monitoring controls to an internal audit department. Remember that. In a smaller company where directors have fewer responsibilities, in such a company, they can monitor internal controls themselves. They don't need a separate department to actually monitor controls. They can do it themselves, because a separate department would need cost. A separate department would mean a lot of costs that you will incur. So it is not cost beneficial. So what kind of an organization would actually need an internal audit function? The first kind is a larger organization or a larger company, where directors have multiple duties, where operations are very large scale, and in such large scale operations, there is a separate department that is needed to keep a check on controls. Does corporate governance suggest to have an internal audit department? Yes, of course, the answer is yes. And corporate governance suggests that an internal audit department should be set up. All right. Next, number of employees. So an organization with a large number of employees will need an internal audit department, because it would then be impossible for directors to keep a check on all these employees themselves. So what do? They divide this responsibility, they set up an internal audit department, and that internal audit department is entrusted with the job of managing and controlling these employees. Next, cost-benefit analysis. Only those organizations will have an internal audit department that can afford an internal audit department. So organizations that feel that the cost of internal audit department is too much will not have an internal audit department. Only those organizations will have an internal audit department that can see a benefit in having done so. Organizations with frequent internal control failures will need an internal audit department. So for example, organizations like CSC, the organization that we just did, would probably need an internal audit department. Why? Because internal control failures in such organizations became very, very frequent, became regular. And since the press had increased scrutiny on CSE, they might need an internal audit department in order to make sure that controls are being monitored and that controls are being kept up to date in order to ensure that internal control failures or service delivery failures do not happen in the future. So, a larger company would need an internal audit department because directors would need help in keeping a monitor on controls. Where employees are higher in numbers, an internal audit department would be needed because it would then be impossible for directors to keep a control or keep a check on this large number of employees. An organization will only have an internal audit function when it thinks that the benefits of having an internal audit function outweigh the costs. An organization will have an internal audit function when internal control failures become regular for such organizations, and when an organization will need an internal audit department when there are regular changes to controls. When controls are changed regularly. Why? In order to ensure that controls are not outdated. If controls need to change regularly, then an internal audit department would ensure that these controls are not outdated. So that answers the question of whether all organizations need an internal audit department, and the answer is no, they don't. It depends whether it is a large organization, whether there are a high number of employees, whether it is cost beneficial, whether there are control failures, and whether there are frequent changes to controls. The second important thing to know within internal audit is what assignments can they perform? What can they do for an organization? So, to answer that question, corporate governance says that internal auditors can be hired to help in risk assessment. Remember, controls are supposed to minimize risks. And if you want controls to properly minimize risks, then you need help in risk assessment. Your understanding of risks should be accurate. And for that, you will need specialists. Those specialists are internal auditors. These specialists can help management and directors understand risks so that they can make proper controls to address those risks. Remember that. Internal auditors are specialists. They can help in risk assessment. They can help the management understand risks so that proper controls can be designed to address and to minimize those risks. Internal audit function or internal auditors can also check value for money of departments. Value for money would be 3 E's. So, internal auditors can check whether operations of the organization are effective, efficient, and start answering the question, what does the third E stand for? When the internal auditor checks 3 E's or value for money of operations, he's checking effectiveness, efficiency, and what of operations. I've mentioned effectiveness. I've written it down. Although it's a really bad scribble, but I've written it down. Well done. All of you know what the third E in BFM stands for. Economy. Well done. Brilliant. So, an internal auditor can also help in ensuring that all operations of the organization are economical, they are effective, and efficient. An internal auditor can also help in examining reports, internal and external. So they can help in examining financial reports that the management prepares for itself. They can help in examining forecasts and budgets in order to ensure that forecasts are prepared properly and that calculations are accurate. They can help in ensuring that financial statements are prepared according to conventions, and they can increase reliability of reports. They can also check compliance with laws. They can also help in assisting, or they can also assist in developing reporting channels or communication channels. Reporting channels would be who reports to who within an organization. So an internal audit department can help in risk assessment, help in assessing value for money of the operations. So value for money would mean effectiveness, efficiency, and economy of operations. They can help in examining reports. They can help in examining both reports, internal and external. So they can examine budgets and forecasts. They can examine financial statements. They can examine management accounts. They can examine cash flow forecasts. Whatever internal report or external reports that management prepares, an internal auditor can examine it. They can help in compliance with laws and regulations, and they can assist in developing reporting channels. So they can assist in developing channels where you can tell the employees who reports to who, to ensure that communication flows properly throughout the organization and that information is reported on a timely basis to the right individuals so that action is taken. All right. The next topic within internal audit that we are going to do is independence of internal auditor. All right. I might need slightly more time today, so I might be going over 9 because I have to explain the audit committee roles as well. I hope you guys are okay with that. I'm not going to take up more than 5 to 10 minutes of your time, so don't worry, I'm not going to prolong it a lot. So can anyone tell me, just in a yes or a no, can anyone tell me in yes or a no, are internal auditors as independent as external auditors? Are internal auditors as independent as external auditors? Well done. The answer generally would be no. No, they're not. All right. Remember why. External auditors are independent because they're not employees of the organization. They are appointed by shareholders as independent specialists in order to verify financial statements. Now we know that internal auditors excuse me, are not as independent as external auditors, because internal auditors will be hired by the company, they will be paid by the company, so they cannot be financially independent of the company. How are internal auditors kept independent? So, to some extent, how is the independence of internal auditors managed? Number one, the first thing is internal auditors report only to the audit committee. Can anyone tell me why reporting to the audit committee would make them independent? Can anyone tell me why reporting to the audit committee can make them independent, can make internal auditors independent? One word. Well done. Arsalan, that's the word. Javed, correct answer. Mehwish, correct answer. Rebecca, correct answer. Usman, correct answer. C has the correct answer. Sorry, I just take initials for names that I cannot pronounce. I'm so sorry, that's my limitation. But Fawad has the correct answer. Kamran has the correct answer as well. Report only to the audit committee. And why does that improve independence? Because audit committee is only comprised by non-executive directors who are independent themselves. Number 2, the scope of internal audit assignments is set by the audit committee. AC means audit committee. All right, now listen to this carefully. Who will tell internal auditors what to check and when to check it? The audit committee. Why can't the management set the scope for internal audit assignments? Can anyone tell me why can't management tell internal auditors what to check and when to check it? Why can't management tell internal auditors what to check and when to check it? Exactly. Because, and the correct answer is, because internal auditors will be checking the work of management. So it presents a conflict of interest where the management, whose work is being checked by the internal auditors, will tell the internal auditors what to check and when to check it. So the scope of assignment, internal audit assignments, is set by the audit committee. The audit committee is going to decide what the internal auditors are going to check and when and how often are they going to be checking it. The third tool that is used to keep internal auditors independent is they have no management responsibilities. By management responsibilities, I mean they don't design or implement internal control systems. Can anyone tell me why? Internal auditors, in order to keep them independent, they are not given responsibilities to design or implement internal control systems. They don't make them, they don't apply them. Why? To avoid self-review. Well done. Because if they made internal control systems and checked it as well, their opinion would not be objective. Third, the chief internal auditor. The chief internal auditor is hired by the audit committee. So, who is the chief internal auditor? He is the head of department in the internal audit department. Just like the CFO, chief finance officer or financial officer, is the head of the finance department, the chief internal auditor is the head of the internal audit department. The chief internal auditor is hired by the audit committee in order to ensure that his recruitment is independent. Now, since you've done all of this, since you've read the criteria for independence of internal auditors, can you tell me, yes or no, can a company have effective internal auditors if it does not have an audit committee? Fawad hired, audit committee hires the chief internal auditor. Can a company have an effective internal audit department if it does not have an audit committee? No, the answer is no. Because look at the independence criteria. Try to identify any independence criteria that does not involve an audit committee. First, audit committee. Second, audit committee. Fourth, audit committee. In all of the independence criteria, there is an audit committee. Now listen to this carefully. In the absence of an audit committee, the internal audit department would have no one to report to, and in which case they will report to the management. They will report to exact same individuals that are actually being checked by the internal auditor. That decreases the internal audit effectiveness. In order to maintain effectiveness of the internal audit department, it is very important that an audit committee should be present. Which brings me to the last topic for the day. Audit committee. The last topic for the day is the audit committee. The audit committee is the third subcommittee of the board. It is comprised only of non-executive directors because its roles are such that non-executive directors are required to comprise the audit committee. And its roles within an organization, we will just discuss. So the roles of the audit committee, we are just going to discuss. The first role of the audit committee is with regards to financial statements. All right? Okay. So the first role, as far as the audit committee is concerned, is with regards to financial statements. And an audit committee is responsible for reviewing controls on financial statement preparation. Why do they review controls on the preparation of financial statements? To ensure that financial statements are reliable. All right. So the audit committee is responsible for reviewing controls on the preparation of financial statements. Why? To ensure that they are reliable. Now listen to this very, very carefully. How does the audit committee do so? How does the audit committee do this? By hiring internal auditors, by having internal auditors. Remember, internal auditors and audit committee, they are codependent. They depend on each other. You will have effective internal auditors if you have an audit committee. An audit committee to run effectively needs internal auditors. They are codependent. An internal audit department means nothing if there is no audit committee. Yes, Arslan, internal auditors often review financial statements in order to root out errors before external auditors come and check them. Because remember, external auditors are going to be reporting to shareholders, to people outside of the organization. Internal auditors will report to audit committee and they will have the errors adjusted before the external auditors come and change their opinion. So for now, remember, the first role of the audit committee is reviewing controls on the preparation of financial statements to ensure that financial statements are reliable. Number two, their second role within the organization is with regards to ICS, and ICS would stand for Internal Control Systems. For ICS, their responsibility is obtain reports regularly from internal auditors regarding effectiveness or quality of controls. Now this is very important. This is extremely important as far as your exam goes. They need to obtain reports regularly from the internal auditors regarding effectiveness or the quality of controls. How do they do so? We just did it right now by setting the scope, or I don't know, or by setting the scope of internal audit assignments. By setting the scope of internal audit assignments, I don't know what's happening. All right. So by setting the scope of internal audit assignments, the audit committee makes sure that reports are prepared on controls regularly, and the audit committee receives those reports to ensure that controls are operating effectively. Their third role within an organization is with regards to internal auditors. So IA stands for internal auditors. For internal auditors, what does an audit committee do? The first is it appoints the chief internal auditor. It monitors independence. I'm writing INDP. Please know that this INDP stands for independence, monitors independence of internal auditors. Number 3, it provides reporting authority. It is the reporting authority of internal auditors. We've covered all of these points in the independence of internal auditors. So for internal auditors, what does the audit committee do? The audit committee appoints the chief internal auditor, monitors the independence of internal auditors, and provides reporting authority to internal auditors. The fourth role of an audit committee on the board of directors is with regards to external auditors. Their first role is to nominate, and bear in mind that I'm using the word nominate, external auditors. So the external audit firm is going to be nominated by the audit committee. Who appoints external auditors? Can anyone tell me who appoints external auditors? The shareholders. They are appointed by the shareholders and they are nominated by the audit committee. Their nomination should be independent, which is why only non-executive directors nominate the external audit firm. Ultimately, they are appointed by their shareholders. They will recommend the remuneration of external auditors. So how much money should the external auditors get? The recommendation will come from the audit committee. They will also monitor the independence of external auditors. And if external auditors find fraud within an organization, who do they tell? Who is the first entity that comes to know about fraud within an organization when external auditors have found it? When external auditors find fraud within an organization, the first people to know about it is the audit committee. So they do provide reporting authority to external auditors as well. And that's why the audit committee is comprised of only independent, non-executive directors, because external auditors are going to be talking about confidential information with the audit committee. Internal auditors are going to be forwarding confidential information to the audit committee. This is why it is very important that audit committee is independent. Other than this, the fifth role of the audit committee is ensuring compliance with laws applicable on financial statements. So any laws that are applicable on financial statements, the audit committee ensures compliance. And sixth is maintaining, the last is maintaining, I've misspelled Maintaining, all right. Maintaining whistleblowing procedures. All right. So whistleblowing procedures are, or what does whistleblowing mean? When employees within the organization want to highlight fraud. So when fraud is highlighted by employees within the organization, it's called whistleblowing. So can anyone tell me why employees would feel, can anyone tell me why employees would feel more comfortable blowing the whistle to the audit committee? Can anyone tell me why employees would feel more comfortable blowing the whistle to the audit committee? Because they are independent. Well done. Because they are independent. Because employees will know that the audit committee cannot be a part or a party to fraud. Why? Because they are independent. Because they're required to be independent. Please remember that the employees will only feel comfortable blowing the whistle on fraud when they know that no action will be taken against them for having done so. This would only happen when they can blow the whistle to the audit committee. Why? Because they are independent. That finishes the roles of the audit committee. I have highlighted the practice question that you can do with regards to the roles of the audit committee. If you go to the last slide for this session, all right, I have not highlighted the question, but all right, bear in mind that by the end of the session, when I forward the revision summary to you, I will also be forwarding a question index to you. So there is a division in topics, and we have divided the past exam paper questions according to topics. That division or that cross-referencing is available in the revision notes. I will be forwarding those revision notes to you by the end of the session, along with any formats that are important for your syllabus. I will see you guys tomorrow. We continue tomorrow. Hopefully, we should be able to pick up pace and start and finish risk tomorrow. Thank you very much. I will make sure that you get the mock in advance as well, Muna. Don't worry about it. All right. I will see you guys tomorrow.